Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. I'm really excited about the panelists that we were able to organize. The first person I'd like to introduce is Julie Gilhart, who's sitting right across from me. Julie Gilhart is the Senior Vice President and Fashion Director of Barneys New York. She joined the store in 1992, prior to which she held a variety of fashion-related positions. Barneys New York, which has 9 flagship stores and 27 co-op stores, has been purchased by a Dubai investment firm that plans to expand it domestically and internationally. In spring of 2007, Gilhart spearheaded the development of an all-organic collection in collaboration with Loomstate, of which we also have on the panel tonight, of casual, sexy clothes that can be bought in every Barneys store. She's inspired many designers to develop green product and was instrumental in having Barneys promote their 2007 Christmas campaign as a green holiday, focusing on fashion products that are environmentally conscious and supported by windows, in-store displays, a Christmas catalog, and a website tie-in. In her work at Barneys, Gilhart's most important task is to have the store speak to the consumer and to the designers with which Barneys partners in a most effective way, with a greater awareness of product development and a deeper understanding of how the customer makes purchasing decisions. The overarching umbrella for these issues is the creation of a new paradigm for the operation of the fashion business in order to leave a lighter footprint on Earth. And next to Julie, we have directly next to her is Rogan Gregory, and next to him is Scott McKinley Hahn, both of Loomstate. And Loomstate launched in 2004 as a casual brand dedicated to creating demand for certified organic cotton using socially and environmentally responsible methods of production. Beginning with the design process in its New York studio, Loomstate directly manages all stages of manufacturing, from the fabric mills to the cut and sew facilities, and finally the laundries, to ensure all partners are participating in responsible manufacturing processes. Loomstate is fully committed to organic farming, which is a form of agriculture which avoids or largely excludes the use of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, plant growth regulators, and livestock feed additives. Recently, Loomstate just launched their second highly successful capsule collection for Target, which I hope some of you were able to go out and buy. I know I got my piece. Excited. In 2007, Rogan won the CFDA Vogue Fashion Fund Award for the Best Designer for his eponymous line, as well as Loomstate and a third line he used to design for Eden. And directly next to me on my left is Leslie Hoffman. She's the executive director of Earth Pledge, and she holds a degree in architecture and design. And she's also worked as a carpenter and green builder for 10 years. Having led the Earth Pledge team since 1994, she has worked to promote sustainable development by identifying and implementing innovative technologies that balance human and natural systems, and by delivering viable, replicable models to government, industry, and communities nationwide. A key initiative of Earth Pledge, Future Fashion, provides guidance to designers, manufacturers, and distributors to help them transition to sustainable materials and methods. Future Fashion runway shows demonstrate to industry and consumers that our choices can make a truly lasting fashion statement. In 2007, she edited this collection here of white papers on the issue of sustainable fashion entitled Future Fashion. And if you're interested in this subject, I highly recommend you go out and buy this. It also includes essays by Julie Gilhart here, and also Dr. Michael Brongart, who is one of the innovators of Cradle to Cradle design, among many other great essays. And so I'm ready to begin. Are you ready, y'all? All right, Leslie, I'd like to start with you. As the technical and scientific expert kind of on this panel, I was hoping you could provide us with a good working definition of what sustainable fashion is.
Well, I'll start with sustainable development or sustainability, and the UN definition is meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising or sacrificing the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And I often think of sustainability as having both as its great strength and great weakness, that it can be a little soft, gray, and fuzzy, which means it's applicable to virtually everybody and every industry. In fashion particularly, it relates to the whole supply chain, from the field or source of fiber all the way through to end of life of a garment or product. So it's the processing, finishing, manufacturing, shipping, laundering. People don't think about it, but the carbon footprint of a garment is about 2/3 in your ownership, maintenance, and use. So how you launder it, how many times you launder it, what you do with it, and then at the end of its life, can you recycle it? Does it go back to the land? Or is it one more piece in a landfill? And all of this can be measured and compared. And so I don't mean to leave too much room in there for wiggling around, but it's really paying attention, and it can go to the economic, fair trade issues, the worker issues, which is really where the fashion industry has focused on sustainability before it has started to think about environmental issues.
And Rogan and Scott, is there a specific design philosophy, that kind of guides your creations? What are you thinking about when you sit down, to sketch out a design or create a new design?
So I think, keeping it simple is really what we try to do, and designing with intent, like a functional intent first and foremost. And aesthetic beauty, it's like functional intent and some aesthetic attractiveness that gives it a life beyond its function. So that's something that I think a lot of what we're doing lately is about, aesthetics. It seems to be subjugated often, in our crazy life, and trying to bring that front and center. So when we talk about sustainability and the triple bottom line, we've kind of added the aesthetic, and we call it the quadruple bottom line. So it's social, environmental, economic, and the aesthetic sustainability. Because if it's ugly, we're all in trouble.
In other words, he thinks about everything.
Yeah.
But I think that, I don't know if is my microphone working?
Is his microphone on?
They'll switch it.
Okay. Anyway, can you? Oh yeah. I would say that the way I approach it is not necessarily just the finished product. It has to do with designing the process. And when I first got involved in designing clothing, I ended up. All the innovation I found was not necessarily in this, the illustration and sketching of things. When I got my hands dirty, when I actually made something, or I watched in the factory, I watched the way the loom worked, or in the wash facility, the way you can, work with finishes. That's kind of the approach that I think we take. That's a little deviates from what the norm is. I didn't go to school for this. So I didn't know the normal, design process, and so I kind of developed my own process in factories, largely. So, and I think the best stuff we've ever done has come from, more hands-on approach. That's why Upstairs is so brilliant, because you see these designers who are taking a medium they might not have worked in before, and they're kind of learning about the dynamics of it and how it works, and then they evaluate it all and use their creativity to come up with something that you might not have thought of before, which is really the brilliance of what is up to.
Yeah. So Julie, I know you've worked a lot with Loom State at Barney's. Was there a specific moment in time that you really realized sustainable fashion wasn't just a trend, but that it was rather, as you've said before, a movement, and that it was really kind of here to stay?
Well, it sort of started when, actually, there was a very poignant moment for me. I get my dates and my facts mixed up, but these guys sent over some T-shirts they had that were all organic. They came over in a brown paper bag, and the buyer came to my office and laid them out on the floor, and they had some graphics on them. And we were sort of thinking, yeah, they're kind of cute. And then we thought, yeah, they're organic. And the buyer actually liked the fact that they were organic too. So I think that for me, that was kind of the place where it started. And then Loom State as a whole was a whole organic collection. And what was interesting is in the early days, I remember talking to Scott and Rogan, and that Rogan was actually the name that more people knew. Loom State was just beginning. And I'm like, use Rogan to sell Loom State. And they're like, no, we got to track it differently. So they were like really ahead of the curve on that. Like they really wanted to know if in fact there was a business in organic. So, you know, it's one of the things that I've worked with, we've been working with a lot of different designers. You have to have something internally that you feel, and I just happen to have a passion for it. So that sort of set the stage, like these guys were doing something amazing. It would work at Barney's and it was stylish. And it started out as a lot of really cool t-shirts with amazing graphics and great colors and a great feel, and you know, that hoodie style thing was just, everybody wanted a hoodie. They didn't want a sweatshirt anymore. So that's kind of how it kind of got going. And then from there, I think the next thing was actually, it was Al Gore's movie. You know, it was happening a little bit before that, but we were never interested in organic just being organic. It had to be organic with style, or even take the word organic out of it now because it had to be sustainable or conscious, whether it be fair trade or something like that. It had to have style. And so we weren't interested in it being that unless it had it. And then with Al Gore's movie, I think it inspired a lot of people. And so then all of a sudden you saw some more design-oriented things happening. So it just kind of caught fire, and then that next season we had a green holiday, which forced the buyers in the store to come up with products that had design, you know, a design cred to it, but were also sustainable. And once you do that, you don't stop.
Yeah.
You know, it's fun to do that, and you get a lot of personal satisfaction out of it too. So the buyers have since then been really enjoying finding things, working with people. So slowly but surely, we're collecting a nice forest of designers.
Yeah, I know you mentioned in the Future Fashion White Papers about, in your essay called The New Cool, about Eco-Lux. Can you define what Eco-Lux is and how it affects, you know, the Barney's consumer and just consumers really around the U.S., especially with the opposition of Eco-Lux being the Loom State for Target line that you just released, which in a way for somebody that maybe can't afford luxurious materials, it is kind of actually luxurious to be able to buy really wonderful sustainable design at Target. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
There was a great, I always refer to this, it had such an impact on me. It had to be at least 15 years ago. There was a great exhibition at the Modern Art Museum here in New York, and it was about high-low, and it was how the low affected the high and how the high affected the low, and the two couldn't coexist. I'm not sure how I explained Eco-Lux in the book, but it might have changed, because now I think that Eco-Lux is defined on transparency and knowing exactly where it came from. And so Eco-Lux, at what these guys did at Target, is very luxurious. Yeah. You know the designers, you know where it came from, you know the fabric, you can trace it, you know everything about it. And the whole process of it, I mean, they were the first ones to start to talk about what Leslie's often talked about soil, and you know, it begins there. So it becomes a very romantic story, and that in the end is very luxurious. But then on the other side, the high side of it is something that's you know, been thought through a lot, just as the low. Well, actually, there's not a high-low when it comes to that. It all is Eco-Lux. If it's been thought through, it's luxurious. And it's probably, you know, in some cases very limited. In the Target case, there is a limitation to it.
So you mentioned the romantic kind of quality of knowing where your clothes came from. I guess also maybe to de-romanticize it, there's a lot of confusion about what exactly is sustainable fashion, in the sense of, if you have a bamboo sweater, is the bamboo, you know, made from the rayon process or the linen process, and what exactly were the chemicals going into it? Or if you have a polyester shirt, is it can it be recycled at the end? And so you have different levels of sustainability, or ethicalness and environmentalism that kind of really can confuse the consumer. Do you think that there needs to be like a viable, accredited certification scheme to really track the transparent systems?
Well, there are many, first of all. There are probably 80-odd different certifications, and
but that can confuse the...
it can, and there's a lot of personal preference and choice in the mix, which I think is a good thing, right? Some people lean strongly towards natural fibers, and others are excited by a recycled or polyester product, and depending on its use and how it's used, that varies. I think when it comes to transparency that Julie was talking about, the real value is being able to get the information, and so how that's communicated, whether it's through a label that everybody just becomes familiar with and accepts, or whether it's just good labeling, where you tell a story and communicate to a potential consumer, what is it, who touched it, where did it come from, using what processes and materials adds value to the product, and value to the life and sort of intellectual life and physical life of the new user owner.
Yeah. There will always be confusion because we're on a learning curve, constant learning curve. And I think, the brands or the designers that build trust in the followers of their products and their designs will ultimately be successful. It's all about, providing information. And I think fundamentally there's two things going on. There's a design problem, which is what we're working on, and then there's a behavior problem on the consumption side. Yeah. And the behavior goes into getting educated. It's like so many fundamental things go on just like in your daily life. If you knew more about your behavior, just what are your kilowatt hours per month in your house? How much electricity you're using? I bet very few people actually know that, or what the variability is. So, it really comes down to your personal. Everyone makes a difference just in the behavior day to day. So.
And speaking to consumer behavior, you had mentioned earlier laundering. Does that even come into your thought process or your design process about how maybe to educate the consumer once they've bought a T-shirt of yours or a pair of jeans? Like, should they be laundering it? How should they be laundering it?
This sounds kind of ridiculous. It might be unreasonable. And if you ask my girlfriend, extremely unreasonable. But from the very beginning, and this starts a long time ago, there are certain parts of my wardrobe I wash, and then there are other parts of my wardrobe I just don't wash. And namely my pants I just don't wash. And if I have to, like if it's a humid day in August, then my girlfriend says it's time to wash the jeans. But I would just wash them in the shower when I take a shower. So I honestly, these
true.
I've never washed before.
Next to you.
It's true.
No, I just wear them and I get some shampoo and I wash the areas that need the most. But which sounds kind of ridiculous, but honestly, like in certain like a T-shirt, you want to wash more frequently, obviously. But pants you don't really necessarily need to. I know that's unrealistic, but from the very beginning we've said I've always encouraged buying rigid jeans that don't have a wash on them and just keep wearing them until you can't wear them any longer. And then when you wash them, just take it easy. You don't need to actually washing you wash the sole out kind of if you use like a really heavy detergent, And there's a notion, I think, an American notion that everything needs to be sterile, And it's just like, I don't necessarily believe in that, So I guess it's a consuming thing, and it's a societal kind of thing that everything needs to be that. So that is changing behavior, which we've talked about, but which might not necessarily be reasonable. But just today, actually, at Loon State, we were talking about, maybe there's an idea for engineering a fiber that doesn't necessarily might be anti-microbial, which exists, and antibacterial. So you don't have to wash your clothes as much. And but the only way to get that across is on a large scale, and you need advertising, you need education, you need labeling, and all this stuff. Which, to be blatantly honest, with a small company, it's difficult to. It takes resources to engineer, or to get a mill to engineer those fabrics. And anyway, the point is, there's all kinds of innovations, and when I say designing the process, like, it's all the way back to the fiber. And when we first started organic, which was probably 5 or 6 years ago, I was talking to these mills, and they'd heard of it, but they didn't really understand the difference at all. Even the mills, I was shocked, And I kept saying, this is something that's important, you got to do it. And then a couple mills caught on, and then they did one for us, and then other people caught on, and it started to kind of build that momentum. So it's the same way if, when we have an innovation in another fiber, like bamboo, what are the answers around bamboo? Some people say it's good, some people say it's not good, but I believe there's a lot of different definitions of sustainability. If you educate yourself and you define your own sustainability, it kind of makes sense. Like, I have ways of doing things like not washing which to me is sustainable. Other people, that wouldn't be acceptable to. So they find other ways of being efficient and sustainable and all the rest of it. Go ahead, Seth.
Scott?
I forgot my point.
Well, I have one thing to add to what Rogan's saying is, there's sort of a continuum, and we each find our place on it, and for each choice, whether it's in your food or your fashion or other elements of your life and your business life, where you see the right point. But I not that long ago, I was talking about line drawings, which I do even in New York, and I saw this young person kind of give me this look, like, I was like, speaking about eco-lux, like, a sun-dried towel or jeans, they're the best, right? So you can wash them in cold water, use an environmentally friendly detergent, and don't throw them in the dryer, and don't iron them, they don't need to be ironed.
And I've heard too that if you take your jeans that you don't wash and you turn them inside out and you leave them in the sun for a couple hours, the UV kills all the bacteria in them, which is that's what they use in filters for, the municipal water. They have these UV kind of lights that they run all the water through that cleans the water. It's a natural, so it actually is a natural way of cleaning your clothes. I mean, and again, this isn't a solution to the problem necessarily, but it's my solution, which seems.
What about the concept of slow fashion that is kind of gaining some credibility in the sustainable fashion movement? And for those in the audience not familiar with it, slow fashion is a type of fashion that espouses lower rates of consumption, buying less but buying much better quality and holding on to it a lot longer, making do and mending, essentially just not buying, slowing the cycle of fashion down. A lot of what we've got right now is the fast fashion cycle, which kind of refers to, obviously, the rapid changeover of styles, but it more accurately refers to the fastness of the network systems through which designers can get something from their head, into sourced and into the mills, into production, and then actually into the stores. It's sped up incredibly fast, which has led to more changeover, and the consumer kind of feels like they need to be buying more and more and more to keep up with everything. So what do you think of slow fashion? Do you think it's viable?
I have a point on that.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons why we're in a lot of trouble, because the idea of making a lot of money really push that. And so you have designers that feel like they have to have collections come out instead of twice a year. They have to have 6 collections at least, or they're not a viable designer. So, and then you have the proliferation of stores like H&M and Topshop that can speed out the trends really fast at a price. And then you have things like Style.com that give you the information immediately. So it was this self-perpetuating thing, and we actually could see where it happened. That all of a sudden, you know, you have a flash collection, then you have a pre-fall collection, then you have a fall collection. It's like, what, all this merchandise, and all these people were building stores, and they had to fill this merchandise all the time. So what happens? The economy crashes, and there's all this inventory, and so there's all this leftover product. So what happens? Everything goes on sale. And so it's this funny process where right now we're asking people, we're actually telling our customers to buy less. You know, it's better, Barney's is a high-end specialty store, and we feel like it's really better if you can learn to buy the best, but just buy less. And it doesn't matter if something is $5,000. If it's made in the way that it would cost that, labor intense, the fabric is worth a lot, it's maybe hand woven, it's all put together by hand, and you know, it'll last. So and we're actually trying to slow it down a little bit. You know, we're actually buying less from designers, just, you know, and filtering out designers because we feel like we have too much product in the store. That we don't want to get into this situation again. And there's very few designers that have held, I can name one, Dries Van Noten, who we've pushed to do more merchandise, and he's like, no, I do 2 collections a year, one for men, one for women, that's it. You know, and he has a life, and he has a thriving business, and you know, he has all these things that these other people are now trying to get back. So it's something that just needs to be addressed.
Yeah, Rogan and I certainly had, you know, in the beginning with the first Rogan product that we put into the market, it was denim that was very special. You know, amazing fabric, stitch detail, washing, very sculptural. And it was almost like art. You know, we were thinking about putting it in furniture stores, like to sell it that way, and it was over $250 a pair of jeans. And there was a reaction to that because we were one of few who were kind of doing that kind of product. But our rationalization was, we wear our jeans, you know, the same pair for a year, and your jean becomes such a special part of, you know, who you are, and it's very sort of linguistic, you know, about that. So we had this cool story, and it caught on. And that sort of struck fire with this like denim production frenzy that all of a sudden, you know, all the big companies were like doing these washes and developing more and more washes, and price was coming down, and that got kind of crazy. So that was like our first experience with slow fashion, because we started really as a slow fashion concept. And then as we progressed into, you know, the idea of sustainability and designing with this respect for an examination of the raw materials we're using and kind of the behavior and the quality of life that we wanted to bring to the table, we had an interesting experience showing the line that we did for Bono and Ali called Eden. This was all about sustainable employment in sub-Saharan Africa, so bringing trade to Africa instead of aid through production of clothing. And when we first previewed the line with a big retailer, I won't mention any names, but the CEO of the company came into our studio, which is unorthodox. People, you don't really show, you know, preliminary design sketches and protos to people until you're ready to really present it. You know, it's kind of like exposing, you know, the guts of things. But they came in and they looked at the walls and they were like, you know, they started asking where the tonnage was. Where the tonnage, I remember this, like looking at Rogan, like the tonnage. we didn't quite get it. And they started talking about truckloads of product coming to the store at night, you know, and it flying out during the day. And like that's the model, you know, like where is it?
And he said like juicy couture, you know what I mean? Like tonnage. I was like what, who? I don't know what you're talking about.
So we had this strange paradox of bringing this like beautiful concept, you know, to a retail structure that was just inarticulate and did not have the capacity to embrace kind of how this worked and build a business model and build a marketing and a floor pattern and everything that sort of could work with us. So I think, now we're at a point where, to Julie's point, Barney's has been so amazing, and they definitely understand how to find the cadence. How can they find a designer's rhythm, and work with those designers and let people naturally grow into themselves. So it's a combination of talent, but having stewards of this process, and thanks to Julie, I mean, we're still here.
Yeah, we probably wouldn't be sitting here. We'd probably be working at Starbucks if it wasn't. But I'll say too, just it has been a little bit of struggle navigating this kind of slow fashion versus fast fashion, because if you ask me, I'm willing to go spend money on, invest in a pair of pants or something that I buy a lot of vintage stuff, and I'll spend like $200, $300 for a used shirt, and people are just like, what? It's huge. And I'm like, yeah, but it's been around for 50 years. It's a really special piece. That's my mentality. So I'm definitely a slow fashion dude. But then you talk to my sister who's getting her PhD. She makes no money, and she's like, congratulations on your organic clothing line that is all over $200. I can't afford one thing in it. And when we did Target, she was like, yay! And she's an environmentalist. So, I mean, and she's like, this is amazing because you brought organic to the masses at a price point, and you know what? It's great design, it's good quality. So it's hard for us to rationalize because it does get a little bit confusing even for us, and we're not perfect, but I feel like if we can do the slow fashion at the far end, and we can do the other end, which is really affecting culture and the way, I mean, Julie at Barney's affects it from the top, and tons of exposure, and then that kind of trickles down, and then at the other end you have good value. I mean, they're both value propositions. They're just completely different animals. So I mean, I guess I'm not being very clear, but I can. We've rationalized both, and I feel like it's really important to address the fast, even though I don't necessarily want to. Because it's not my personal choice. I think we have to try to educate, because not, like a fraction of the population shops at the slow fashion way that most everyone goes to the fast fashion anyway.
Yes.
But I think even at lower price points, as you say, you're still offering value, and I think at the end of the day, people have to realize that if you're in such a rush, you're actually not appreciating what you've got. So whether it's the $39.99 Target from Barney's jacket that I love and wear and value and will keep wearing, I mean, I think just because it's less expensive doesn't mean that it should get thrown away more quickly. I mean, I think we all have to function at the level we're at and appreciate what we have and where it comes from and what the impacts of having it and using it are, and keep trying to enjoy saying no thank you a little bit and enjoy what we have and kind of make a mental game, if you will, like taking pleasure not just by being gluttonous.
The one thing I think is really interesting, especially with the whole Target thing, I think I was telling you all this. I had a conversation with Norma Kamali, and she does a collection for Kmart. And Norma Kamali is super stylish. I mean, she definitely has a New York urban sensibility to her. And I think the highest price at Kmart was $20. And she said she approached her design at just the same as she did her own collection. It was just different, lower price fabrics, and maybe not as much detail. And I all of a sudden thought, and she said, actually, this is sort of an interesting point. She said her best-selling sizes were large, and extra, extra large. Whereas Barney's, our best-selling sizes are 4, 6, and 8. So I thought that's interesting. And then the other thing is that all of a sudden I imagined this high-low thing again, and that everybody's quite stylish. And the sustainable thing about that is if you have, of a $4,000 trench coat that you love, you're going to wear it for 10 years. You're not going to throw it away because you love it. But at the same time, if you have something stylish from Kmart, which as a child I remember going into Kmart and it was just elasticized pants and big tops. Nothing that you could really fall in love with. And now all of a sudden, like Loom State for Target, and they're giving really stylish things that you can fall in love with. You're not going to, and if they're made well, which is very important, you're not going to want to dispose of them. You're going to want to keep on wearing them. And that's a cool thing. I mean, I went to this, I went to the Met, the Costume Institute thing, and it's really all about wearing what's new. And I kind of went around in circles about what I was going to wear. And then finally I ended up wearing something from 2004. And I felt so happy in that all of a sudden. I thought, yeah, that's really gives me a lot of pleasure. Instead of like scurrying around buying something new.
I think that's a big point. You mentioned it too. I always find like I'm obsessed with composting now because I'm spending more time at my house out east, and I'm thinking about things I can put in the compost, and should it be hot or should it be cold, and how can I make it more efficient? And I have it like literally where I can throw this shit out my window and it goes right in the compost on the second floor. I mean, it's just like being creative about not making it more like fun and not like a drag, and that's kind of an important way to approach it. And like with kids, it's like that's critical here to like challenge them with ways, because it's pretty cool when you complete the cycle, and when you take like a cotton t-shirt and put it in your compost and it disappears into the, and then you put it in your garden, it's like, whoa, I never thought that could even happen,
That's a good segue into what we're doing at the mass level, is really trying to reform the commercial supply chain. Like it's flawed. So by having a brand that is now kind of flying beyond us, we've sort of given it life, but now it stands for something that is anonymous, and it's kind of like for the people, right? So it goes inside the supply chain that's, creating I'm talking about the trading companies that source from Asia at a very low price, cheapest cost of labor, bring it all the way back and sell it to the mass retailers here, whether it's, Walmart, Target, JCPenney, Kohl's, Macy's, all these huge engines of sales. And if we can basically put our channel inside and incubate from inside out, changing how factories work, how raw materials are used, and bring that into the stores, you start giving a vehicle for the rest of the product that they're selling to also follow suit, because the consumption is now embraced.
What were some of the challenges of working with Target and trying to create your line?
Early on, getting them to feel comfortable to actually step out in the public and say that they're doing this responsible,
organic
commercial choice and organic. And what we did was we were approached, and it took about 2 years before we could actually get the first collection we did for them into the stores, because we had to work with their production and sourcing team. And we use some non-governmental organizations that have access into the farming communities, into the regulations and the certifying bodies, and educate the people inside Target. Get them smart about what they're dealing with. And once they felt comfortable that they knew what was happening, then you can kind of come in with the product. That's really how.
Do you think there'll be a third collection, hopefully? If you can't say.
No, I mean, part of what we're doing is really, we want to bring sustainable product, quality product. That's the value, to an affordable position in the market, and we want to change what happens commercially. Right now, the conventional cotton industry is a very toxic, problematic industry. That paradigm of infertile soil, monoculture on the agriculture, is causing so many problems, and we've been successful at romanticizing small family farms and peasant life through Loom State and through this amazing aesthetic that we've brought to that culture. But now the next chapter for us is saying, all right, how are we going to change the commercial reality? How can we work with King Cotton, the big giant industry, and get them to figure out ways to stop using all these chemicals? Because it's a huge story there. You've got seed companies, chemical companies that are making fertilizers, defoliants, and these are thousands of acres of land that are farmed in a way that's all about yield, all about more fiber, so that it can get put into the market. So that's the monster that really we need to change, and the only way we can do it is by working with a partner like Target and the suppliers that supply them. And our vehicle, our vessel is our brand. So when people see it in a high place and a low place, I think what's going to happen is they'll become educated. They'll realize that this change is happening. It's essential. You have to support it in both places. And that's what's changing. It's not putting a brand out to pasture at a mass retailer is over. Now it's actually people are realizing, wow, you can flourish at mass. You can reach a lot more people, and you can get the message out. And it's becoming very competitive.
And with information, and it's so much faster now. When we did this thing for Target, I was like, and we were just talking about this today too. I expected, the less fashionable end of our collection to do better, and in fact, like the most fashionable pieces did the best at Target, which I was like, whoa! I didn't think that was going to happen, which is really encouraging, for us. And I feel in large part like if that's what people want, then there's hope, for being. And now it's good timing. Like I would not have been able to say that, I think, 5 years ago. But with all those Go collections, they've really managed to get kind of a pretty savvy, consumer.
There's so much media out there, though, that there's such a difference than 10 years ago. That everybody, no matter where you are, if you're in the middle of Idaho, you have access to it. So it can change like your aesthetic even. You start to look at things over and over, and you change the eye.
And the other thing I think that's happening that's great is these guys are talking about driving things in a very fashion-conscious community, really. And as Julie says, the United States, even if you're in Idaho, you're more fashion-conscious than a lot of people, let's say, in China, right? At the very high end they are. But in the manufacturing community, this stuff's having a huge impact. We're doing life cycle assessments of 11 textile factories in China right now for what probably is the largest men's shirt manufacturer in the world, right? They're in, like a dozen countries, and they are starting to say, oh, let's see, some of the people we're supplying are starting to ask these questions. We want to get ahead of the curve. We want to improve. We're looking for the ways that we can make better product, save money. A lot of this impact of the industry is energy consumption, so finding ways to be more efficient and reduce the amount of energy. They're starting to look at cold water dyeing, for instance. It's a great way to save energy, reduce carbon footprint. So what's happening here from the media and a fairly savvy consumer base is starting to impact what's happening on farm fields and in factories in places that are on the other side of the world. So, and if there's anything about fast that's important in this is we need to make the change, or changes, they're multiple, as quickly as we can. So we really need to drive this by getting people enthusiastic and intelligent about it.
And that's kind of a lot of what your Future Fashion initiative is also about. It's just kind of, I remember the first time I saw the show, I think it was in 2007, I maybe saw the show, 2006.
Big one in 05
Yeah.
and a big one in 05 in New York and a big one in 08, January 08 in New York.
Was it, wow, 2005?
Yeah, it might have been. Time flies.
With all the designers, and it really is eye-opening because there used to be this really kind of crunchy granola aesthetic that was always associated with eco fashion, and I think definitely with Loom State you've successfully changed that aesthetic. What about if we kind of speak to Julie's dress that she has on? It's recycled. What about this aesthetic of recycling clothes and kind of doing patchwork and taking what we have and making it new? Can you just speak to that at all? Who are you wearing right now?
Well, actually, I'm biased. This was Rogan. He designed this. We do this thing every August in the store where we have our customers come in and they bring in denim, and we give them 20% off of a new pair of jeans they want to buy. We have a customer that wants to buy new things all the time. So so every year we take the denim and do something with it. And so this year we asked 8 different types of designers, everybody from like Versace to Rogan to somebody like Anne Demeulemeister to the Rodarte girls, and just to take the denim and do something with it and make it an amazing outfit. And Elle photographed them, styled them like an editorial shoot, and then we sold them on eBay, and we raised about $7,500 for Oceana. So it was the first time of doing that whole thing, and I think to do it again, it could be bigger and better. You know, we learned along on the way. But it's interesting that every time you do something, you set an example, you also catch the eyes of other people. Because one project I'm super excited about is, well, there's 2 projects that I'm super excited about. And I get excited about it because, not because of how the ka-chink, ka-chink, ka-chink is going to be at the cash register, but it's the long-term value of it. And also the excitement of it. Fashion needs to be exciting. I mean, buying something, wearing something doesn't need to be boring. I mean, it needs to lift your spirits. And I think we've lost that. You know, and it depends on who you are. I mean, if you're a utilitarian type of guy and wearing a uniform does it for you, do it. You know, but think about how that happens. But a lot of the European fabric houses, a lot of the European couture houses stock load a lot of fabric, and they have a lot of waste, and they don't sell them off. They either destroy them or burn them because they don't want them going out into the marketplace. So at Saint Laurent, Stefano Pilati, the new designer there, is a very cool guy, and he's very interested in this subject, but doesn't know how to approach it or do it, because there's not a lot of raw materials out there for someone at the high level to use. So what he decided to do is go into the archives. He had an intern archive every single piece of fabric they had. They put it out on a table, and he saw that there was a lot of cotton drill. So I said, I'm going to use all the cotton drill. So he used every bit of cotton drill they had, and he decided to make the perfect closet. I mean, this was so fun for him. He made the perfect closet, and it's like a dress, a pair of pants, a skirt, a little jacket, a shoe, and a bag. And like there were 3 meters of yellow, there was like maybe 10 meters of khaki, there was, you know, whatever it was. He used it up completely, and he created this new label called New Vintage. And it's going to be, that's another thing. With the whole organic, sustainable thing, you have to, and I learned this from these guys, it's commitment. You don't it's not in and out, because there's a lot of people that are depending on you to continue. So he started this whole thing that is going to continue. So
The great part about that is that all that fabric's already paid for.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I'm sure the CEO was like, good job.
Oh, yeah. No, it was definitely...
I love the sustainable thing.
The CEO really supported it.
Yeah, I'm sure he did.
But see, that's about using what you have, you know?
That's the waste
and
thing
also the cool thing about it, talk about Eco-Lux, it's all limited. You can't reorder it, and everything is numbered, and it's never going to appear again. So you'll have it for the rest of your life if you take care of it.
You guys,
if you hand wash it in cold water and then dry it on your
Don't wash it if you're Rogan.
line dry in the sunshine.
You guys were addressing the eco-luxury type paradigm, what that means and definition of it. And the big issue I've always had is this idea of luxury, which is just equals waste. Like, I'll show you how much I can waste. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm gonna drive this Hummer by myself. You know what I mean? And I'll show you how huge my car is. You know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. And like this big McMansion, I have all these rooms I don't even use. You know? It's like, this doesn't make any sense to me at all. And it's just wasteful, you know what I mean? I think this is really a great demonstration of, you know, in the past it might have been, look how extravagant this fabric is, you know, or this fur or whatever else it is, came from this really rare animal. Now it's more like, how cool is it to reuse these fabrics that already existed? I mean, you know, it's like changing the whole way that
Gratification.
idea of satisfaction, or that idea of, when there's that high that people get when they buy something. Was in the past kind of, this is so exotic, now it's that same sensation, that chemical thing that happens in your brain, but it's from a more sustainable / efficient, place, which I think is a new kind of eco-lux. Yeah.
I mean, we have another designer in the store, Duro Lowu, who really started out using like really fanciful printed silks and patching them together. And, it was an expensive process, but, they're all one-of-a-kind dresses.
It's awesome.
Or like-
Dosa too, right?
And Dosa, Dosa doesn't use as many recycled fabrics. What Dosa does that's very interesting is that basically recycling is using waste. And so the salvage, the extra pieces, the leftovers are all patchwork together or used to make other things. And Natalie Shannon from Alabama, which is amazing to hear her speak, she's very much on it in terms of that, and she was tracking it, and in 1 month they had just a garbage bag of trash, of waste. They reuse everything. So I don't know how many design students are in here, but it is kind of like the Rogan and Scott and Leslie, you got to think out of the box now. We had a conversation with a major designer today, and they were talking to us about strategy, and it sounded like the same strategy I've been hearing for the last 5 years from other people too. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be one of the most innovative designers in the world. Just do it differently. It's not going to be the same template in a few years from now. It's totally changing. And that's what I mean about the whole sustainability thing being more of a movement than a trend. It's going to change everything.
And one of the things I've noticed over a long period of time is that there are other industries that have really been much further ahead than the fashion industry in addressing sustainability. The green building movement is like, anybody worth their salt these days is saying, that is what I do, right? And certainly in the food industry, the organic grocery business, it's 20 years of solid foundation. And here's this, it's been interesting for me that here's this industry that is a trend-setting industry that has kind of come to it late for a bunch of different reasons, but my anticipation is that this industry is going to reinvent what sustainability means, and in the textile industry, it's really starting to bubble in a big way, and in the design side about everything, designing for end of life. How do we take this darn thing apart so that, we can take the metal and recycle it and take the cotton and get it back to the land, et cetera, et cetera. So there's, at the end of the day, there's just tons of opportunity in this, and it's exciting and it's fun and what a designers like to do, but, come up with new ideas.
Before we let the audience ask some questions, I was just wondering if Scott and Rogan, you have any words of advice for design students that are maybe looking to start designing more responsibly?
Definitely getting educated on what the palette of materials that you design with, what is that palette? There's two parts to it. There's the biological resources and there's the technical resources. Biological resources are all the things that we grow and are sort of living on the planet and we're consuming at a rate that needs to be balanced so it's restorative and we don't create extinction. On the other side, there's the technical nutrients or the technical resources that are the closed systems, the closed loops that are things that are synthetic but aren't toxic. Things that we're people out there like scientists are examining what these materials are. You got to find the resources that can sort of eliminate, 80% of what's causing problems and use the 20% of things that are benign and, add into restorative loops. A design process that, can come from raw material extraction all the way to the waste paradigm and back again, and this
Cradle to cradle.
cradle to cradle. Yeah.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. But I think that what's unique about what we've been doing is it's not, I'm an aesthete. Scott said it today. He's like, dude, trust me, I know you're going to have an opinion on everything, that's not the concern. So for me, it starts off with aesthetics and making sure that I like the way it looks, and that's kind of the way it starts. But like I was saying before, if you think about every step of the way, kind of trying to evaluate and critique every part of the process, trying to apply that it will enable you to achieve innovation that other people who are just thinking about one part of it might not ever get to. So that's that's how I feel I've had the most luck, is trying to think about all parts of the process as opposed to, and that's what got us to the organic part, because we were thinking about like where everything came from, and we got to make sense of this. In addition to what Scott's saying, because if we're able to get some guidelines around what sustainability is and make some sense of it, which I think we're coming to, and with this administration, hopefully we'll get a little more guidance around that, because still it's nebulous. But what Scott's speaking to, if we can hone in on the things that are acceptable, like whether they be kind of organic or naturally derived, or whether they're synthesized. If we can try to make sense of those things, then I think we'll get to something that is, in the end, kind of a closed loop, as opposed to, the cradle to grave phenomenon.
Yeah, and tapping into your third eye, so you can predict the future and understand, what are the limits of gratified desire that people are going to want tomorrow. But that's the trick. Gratification is changing, and I think it's becoming much more fulfilling. So.
Great. Just raise your hand and they'll bring the microphone to you because we are recording this. Okay, thanks.
To Scott and Rogan, you talked about being in the mills, and I wondered where you do your manufacturing, and then how do you control this process of keeping it clean, so to speak?
So we have factories globally. We've kind of, for a small company, we did something really strange starting out, probably against the grain of what good business advice would be. We sold all over the world and we made product all over the world. But we made product in places that we actually went to the factories and met the owners and saw where they, sourced their materials from. And as a small company, when you know an owner and you're kind of trading in a method of going to the factory twice, 3-4 times a year, they're coming to New York, you're sitting down, you're talking. It's a very intimate relationship. As it starts to get bigger, you need to engage the third-party certifiers and the people who are really policing what we call code of conduct or terms of engagement. And any respectable company now that's doing manufacturing anywhere in the world has to address the human rights issues and the environmental risks that are associated with stewardship of production. So the places we do product, Great Organic Cotton in Peru and in Turkey, those are the two main hubs for us. The factory we use in Peru, she's Alessandra at Jalapesa, she's building this incredible daycare center, and all the women who work in the factory bring their kids to the factory. And it's super clean, it's a beautiful place. She's cultivating organic with the programs down there, and the dyeing is state of the art. They're doing all kinds of stuff, even with the energy. So we're fortunate to have, this kind of flag that we wave. So certain factories like to team up with us and be best in class. But like I said earlier, with the target paradigm and the more and more companies that are starting to manufacture this way, that will virally expand. And the challenge on the production end is the retooling costs, because a lot of the big guys, who are saying we want organic, we want sustainable, but we don't want to pay a penny more for it, because guess what? customers don't care if it's organic or if it's sustainable. What they want to know is that it's competitively priced and that it looks great. So the educational process that's happening is we're realizing we can't discount the future. Actually, buying organic is like putting money in a savings account versus taking a loan on conventional product, because eventually those costs catch up to you. So these are like economic sort of equations that are difficult to get the average fashion customer to comprehend. But slowly, I think, working with these great factories, even in Asia, I hate the China phobia that goes on, about, you hear one bad story and all of a sudden all of China, which is this massive place, is taboo to make product. So in our labels where we make stuff in Asia, we say like made in China by our friends. And, it's just getting people to disarm a little bit and, really think about what they're saying.
That's great. Thank you. It's really inspiring. Thank you.
Thanks.
Let me say that we're not perfect. So, I mean, that sounds really good, but trust me, if there's someone who's pissed off in a factory and wants to complain, there are exceptions to the rule, and we're not there every day in every factory, and we're lucky if we get there, once a year. So I don't want to. We're a small company with very limited resources, so we're doing the best we possibly can. And like you said, we count on factory owners to really take some of the responsibility themselves. And you have to look in their eyes and believe, because when you leave, even if you have third party, there's not someone there all the time making sure they're doing things right. So a lot of it is picking your partners and making sure that, because we aren't perfect. I just want to say that,
Hardest thing to do is pay them on time. That's the biggest struggle for us, paying them.
But see, that's the other thing, is that nothing's 100%. And there's a lot of people that haven't tried to do things in a more conscious way because they feel like they'll be singled out as maybe not being completely, greenwashing or something like that. That's so many people like that, and it's silly, because as long as you're trying to be transparent, fine. Even if you do one portion of what you're designing is something that has this sort of conscious quality, then that's just one portion. I mean, it's just like Barney's isn't a green store. I mean, we're the worst. I mean, we don't even have an internal recycling program, really. So, but that's all right. I mean, because we say that, but you just make steps where you can, and then they start adding up and adding up. It's just the important thing is transparency, like talking about where you're good and talking about where you're not so good.
And constantly making progress, like seeing it as a transition and always working on it and being engaged in it. And, I often run around saying, perfect doesn't exist. So it's really about making the effort and being honest.
But as far as it really comes back, I mean, because we're at a design museum that focuses on design, it all comes back to really good design. I mean, you can talk about all this stuff, and unless you have really good design that's interesting and captures your, imagination and, grabs you, it doesn't matter.
Question back there.
Hi, Ayana Mead, a contributing writer for Greenopia.com. I was wondering if you were experiencing or having success with marketing to demographics that may not be as knowledgeable about sustainability issues, maybe just the larger American community in general, and maybe not the dark greens as they call them, and communities of color and all these other demographics. Or do you see a critical mass happening in terms of like who you can market to, and what type of education process do you think you might have to engage in to reach out to these other groups?
We had a friend of ours who's a designer at a company that sells to the urban markets, which, I don't know, I guess that's, well, urban brands, like brands that are associated with hip hop music and that kind of stuff, and street fashion. And what the struggle for these companies is always to match the identity that they think they are with what the kids, that are 15, 16, 17 actually are looking for, because they're always trying to circumvent, what the companies are marketing to them. So there's a tricky balance there to figure it out. And our friend came back from a focus group, and there were like 15 people who they picked a cross section of people from urban neighborhoods, and they all 6 out of the 15 brought in Loom State tears for our advertising for the Target program. And what you're starting to see is this crossing of, what they're calling this urban hippie kind of vibe, where kids are actually responding to the call to nature. It's like they're waking up. There's a lot of people, like Russell Simmons is doing an amazing job in talking about everything from meditation to yoga to just having the clarity of mind and living an examined life. And this is getting to the kids, because these people and the hip hop artists, they're the poets, they're the role models, and they're just reflecting back what's happening. So for us as a brand on the marketing side, it's really difficult to do anything but just communicate what we're doing. I mean, we're really not preaching at all, and half the time, we're just trying to stay out of our own way. So, I don't know if that answers your question, but as we get smarter and get more information, you always try to respond to it. The bigger you are, it's harder.
Do we have any other questions? This gentleman.
So sustainable and green are very fashionable right now, but like today I was reading an advertisement for Monsanto, and they said Monsanto is sustainable, and BP has a green logo, and Chevy has a green logo also. So I was wondering two things, I guess. What if this is just fashionable? And then what if the message gets co-opted so that what's called sustainable isn't really? And where does that leave you guys?
Well, it's all moving all the time. And in some ways, all those big companies marketing themselves as green is turning more people on to seeking out what's green. I think at the end of the day, the smarter we are, the better questions we ask. And if there's anything the media has been great at, is it's harder and harder to hide, right?
They're also seeding, what's coming culturally. I mean, the biggest companies in the world understand that if we deplete our resources, there isn't anything to produce product with, to sell, and to have a market. So the promotion of green and sustainable, I mean, it is legitimate. I mean, with companies like Walmart and, even the initiatives at the car companies in moving away from fossil fuel to electric cars and trying to do something we should have done 50 years ago, even longer, is finally now it's getting traction, and it's price of entry. To stay in business, you need to be talking about this.
But one of the things that happens also, I think, is that companies sometimes market ahead of when they're actually practicing. And that can be either very confusing and even misleading, and it can also sort of presage what's coming, So it's sort of a balancing act. I mean, in the environmental movement, of course, people were ranting and raving about BP. Like, here they are, this minuscule slice of their business is clean or green, and 90+% of it is the same old oil business, On the other hand, they've done some interesting things, and they've opened a lot of eyes, and they're moving, they're trying, they're making an effort. So,
Let me see if I can clearly ask this question. This is a question for Leslie, actually. Mm-hmm. Just listening to what you were saying triggered this question, but is there any organization that's actually in numbers tracking and quantifying or figuring out exactly how many tonnage of waste we're saving, or as an overall in this whole sustainability movement, in every sector? Because I've always wondered about that. Like, there's so much, and then people accuse companies of doing greenwashing or whatever, but if we can have concrete, and I'm sure there must be somebody who's trying.
I don't know of one organization that's doing sort of a universal tracking I often talk about metrics and think that you're touching on something that's very important, because at the end of the day, if you can't measure it, it's hard to really know how much progress you're making. And that's why, we do a lot of this life cycle assessment work and start to come right down to, like how many tons of carbon have been emitted to make a shirt or a kilogram of fabric or whatever. So I think metrics are very, very important. And then, of course, being able to understand what those metrics mean requires a certain level of sophistication in each and every setting, right? So the metrics might mean one thing for a manufacturing facility manager, and something very, very different for somebody who's flipping through racks trying to figure out what shirt to buy. So, having the right metrics made available to various players in the chain is an important thing. It's really just starting in terms of people really doing this work and measuring it and then comparing year to year. And
I think the government is going to have a lot to do with it in the policy.
Yeah.
Pretty soon the waste that technical companies like electronics businesses create, they're going to be responsible for disposing of it, and it's going to be law. So if you find an iPod in the trash, Apple gets fined for it eventually, and that's the lobbying that's going on in DC right now to hold companies accountable so that when they design product, it doesn't create toxicity.
And in Europe, they've already got that,
yeah.
Right? And by the way, once the company's responsible for it throughout its life cycle, they change the way they design them. Because then the ability to take them apart is critically important. They want those technical nutrients back to make the next iteration of iPod.
I just wonder if you could say a little bit more about that point, because that was the question I was going to ask, aware that certainly in smaller European countries there's been substantial impact by government, also like at the grassroots level and in terms of education, which you've obviously talked about. I just wondered if maybe other panelists could say a little bit more about the potentialities that the government has in this very big country for being effective at a more grassroots level, maybe like a wish list for President Obama, if that's possible. Maybe other panelists other than Scott, because it would be a very interesting trajectory to follow and to know a little bit more about.
Well, one of the things, because I'm really concerned about is the loss of jobs in the United States. And we used to have a thriving textile business here. And if you look at, if there's any students here, you have less resources here in New York than you used to have. All those trimming places and the fabric places, they're not existing anymore because we've been exporting everything out of this country. And there's cities down in the South. There's places like Detroit. I was in Cleveland, and the hotel I was staying in was actually a hotel that used to be a place where they sold textiles. So it's really something that is pretty much impossible to do. But I also believe in the impossible. So that's one. Leslie and Scott and Rogan have different ways of looking at things, but we all come to the whole consensus. But I think, why not? I want something made in the USA. I want to give somebody a job. I want to do it locally. It makes complete sense.
And actually, Obama is addressing that. I follow the energy part of the stimulus plan. They're putting projects that use parts and pieces in America at the head of the line in terms of accessing that stimulus plan money. And lo and behold, there's not much solar manufactured in America.
But see, you also, the designers have to have, there's a great quote up on the second floor that starts the exhibition that you all have right now. And it really talks about the responsibility being in the designer's hands. And they're responsible for putting the pressure on the manufacturing, putting the pressure on the consumers, getting the consumers to become more awake. And I had an interesting conversation with a very successful designer that wants to start a secondary collection. And that secondary collections are a dime a dozen. You become a big designer, you want to create more volume, you do a lower price collection. I mean, it's just like a formula. And we were like, well, why don't you do it in the USA? That could give you kind of this new kind of thing that's going on. And they're like, it's impossible, we can't get the prices. But afterwards I was thinking, maybe impossible, but not improbable. You might have to do it a little differently, but you could do it, and it could be a really cool thing. They completely were sticking to the old formula. And I know you guys are like saying there, you can't possibly do it for, a good price or whatever, but you do some things here. And and maybe you do less, and maybe you grow it from that point instead of like starting big. That it's the designer's responsibility. Now I'm kind of starting to get it, thanks to the opening of the exhibit that you all should see if you haven't seen it.
And to address the wish list, the Obama wish list, I feel like we started this about 5-6 years ago, and with the previous administration, it just was. Culturally, it was like swimming upstream. It just felt like we weren't getting anywhere. It's like now now I appreciate it now because it's completely switched the other way. And I heard a Obama commencement speech, and he was talking about the aspirations of the graduates, and he said, instead of aspiring to that corner office and that McMansion, let's reevaluate what our aspirations culturally. And Michelle Obama, fashion, she's super fashionable, like wearing, getting her to wear things that maybe are a little more sustainable and, a little more thoughtful in that regard would be really cool. Like they have a garden at the White House. I mean, these are things that are little things but are a huge deal because we're really, they're setting an example. And it's not just, and they not only can, affect policy, but they can affect trend, which is pretty amazing. I mean, that's, it's pretty unique. I wouldn't say that Bush was setting any kind of fashion trends, you know what I mean? But I think these two could really do something, which is pretty amazing, And getting their ear, and I have to speak back to this industry is super sluggish. I don't know my numbers perfectly, but I think the automotive industry is the biggest industry. Fashion is second, I believe, and they are absolutely the slowest to the, and fashion is about the second slowest, which is kind of ironic. But if policy changes and there's a different kind of cultural appreciation, I think that's the way things start to change. You can't just say and preach things. You got to show people this quality of life that Scott and I preach, that is like, and the cover of Dwell magazine every month is small house, smaller is better. And those kind of things, I think, and finding a little sexier term than slow fashion, making it appealing in that way, and it starts at the very top with Julie, but I think if we can affect change at the mass, more target level, that's, it's all works together in harmony. There's not, like you're saying, there's not one silver bullet. It's like we need to it's a way of thinking that we kind of have to instill in people.
Yeah, and I think the wish list would be in some form of tax incentives around what our industry is doing to retool the supply chains. Subsidies and things that stick around for a long period of time after the original intent of the subsidy is problematic. Like our Farm Bill has, a legacy of still paying farmers to not even grow crops because they figured out how to sort of work within that bill. But this is what I think, the wish list would focus on, is ways to retool, incentivize designers, create innovation, and give people that are stepping out there and being courageous kind of the platform to reverse the logistics. Because if you keep working in the same model, you're going to end up with an intent to change. If you keep working in the same way we've been doing things, you might end up a few degrees away with something a little better. But you've got to really inverse everything in terms of the process that you're approaching the problem to really get to, you know, a new day.
And it's looking more and more likely that within this administration we're going to be pricing carbon, and that will change a lot. And we've dragged our heels, and while the Europeans haven't perfected it, they took a first step, and I think it'll actually be really interesting to see what the follow-up to Kyoto is in Copenhagen at the end of the year. I mean, I think it's likely that Obama will attend, and it's likely that the United States is going to start to take some kind of leadership role. And, you know, when everybody's paying a price for the carbon that they're responsible for, we will change the way we do things.
All right, we have time for one more question.
This is for Scott and Rogan. So having been on both sides of the fashion industry, I guess, you know, talking about this high-low concept or delivering to the mass market, and I loved the comment about your sister. That was awesome. I guess my belief is that in order to go across those genres, you really have to live a creatively inspired life yourself. And I'm wondering if you believe that's true, and if you, how you keep creativity in your life on that basis.
We just built a teepee a couple weekends ago.
That's cool.
This wasn't just any teepee. You know? Like, we took it very seriously. It was out in Montauk in eastern Long Island. This friend of mine got us to build like 5 teepees, and Tracy Fife, who's a designer, and Mike D from the Beastie Boys. I mean, it was just a hodgepodge of people built it. But it was such a great experience, because it was, you know, I'm a clothing designer, and to use materials in a different way, it was really inspirational. And I find that if you're kind of, that's my inspiration. When I don't just do clothing, I do use my hands in different ways and engage. That really kind of excites and informs me. That's a horrible answer, but
yeah, but it's a great question. I mean, you definitely need to honor that space in your life to be creative. You know, without it, it really shuts off sort of a whole perspective that doesn't allow the ideas to flow. So, I mean, there's so many things that you can do to be creative. It's just making the time, you know. That's the most important thing, is making the time.
Ultimate luxury.
Yeah, but you know, we live in a strange point in time where, you know, we're so busy and we have all this technology to make us more efficient, and it creates a little more space in your life, and then you fill it with something else quickly, and you keep sort of getting, you know, in a tougher position to manage. And then you have all these strategies to back yourself out or to handle it all, and it's really just kind of like simplifying. And we're talking a lot about quality of life, you know, modesty of scale, the new American dream that, you know, actually really is just going back to what the American dream was: family, friends, really healthy food on your dinner table, laughing, singing, dancing, playing, and, you know, that stuff is like, that's the creativity.
Puppet shows.
Puppet shows.
He loves puppets.
Yeah. Singing in the morning, if you can.
Meditating.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.